All right, let's get this second thought character who I recently heard was an incredibly insightful and good person who has never had a bad take. I can't think of any bad takes from second thought. Well, none that are within the last 6 months at least. You know what I'm saying, chat? You know what I'm saying? Grandma was talking about a list of Union restaurants in Vegas the other day. I think it was called Union Eats. Ooh, that's a good idea. That's useful. Gremlo, providing value to his community. Wow.
This episode is brought to you by Ground News. Authoritarianism, the practice of eating only people who have published books. Wait, that's not right. Authoritarianism, truly one of the words of all time. A decadent 7 syllables long and wonderfully vague. If you've ever had a conversation about politics, and if you're watching this channel, I'm sure you have, you've likely heard someone use the term.
Bro, he is bringing the 80s hairstyles back. Or early 90s. Like, let's fucking go.
Or maybe you've even used it yourself. It's popular in pretty much every corner of the mainstream political spectrum. Liberals, conservatives, the dreaded centrists, and even some lefty groups like anarchists and libertarian socialists. But what does it mean? And what gives it so much weight in the political discourse? Well, that's what this video is about. We've got a pretty poor understanding of what authority is here in the West, but I bet we can fix that.
90s JT,
Let's start with the generally
True.
accepted definition. Authoritarianism, favoring or enforcing strict obedience to authority, especially that of the government, at the expense of personal freedom. Okay, this is a pretty bad...
All I can say is, that's every state. Or frankly, every organization or club or everything. If you don't enforce your authority, then you don't have it. I mean, this is every boss. This is every job. This is every organization where you're not in charge. You give up personal freedom in exchange for the benefits of being a part of a greater collective. And if the collective doesn't enforce its judgments on you, then it's not really an organization at all. And if you don't, and by the way, if you consent to or participate in the formation of those decisions, then there can't be a problem.
Definition, if we're being honest.
It
mentions the government in there, but doesn't really commit to being political, just kinda, when you want people to follow the rules. That's not super helpful when we're trying to nail down a heavily used term, and one that deals with some serious topics. Okay, so what if we expand it to include how people generally use the term? Generally speaking,
people in the H3 subreddit Discord keep mentioning how much of an extremist this guy is. Did anything happen with Second Thought? Used to watch their videos early COVID. Did anything happen? They made some glib comments about Hamas attacking, in the immediate aftermath of the Hamas attacks. They were a little bit too glib about the consequences and kind of were just well, that's what happens when you oppress people. And they were kind of oh, yeah, if you attack the, that kind of shit. Honestly, I think it was a bad look.
when someone uses the word authoritarian, they are often, but not always, using it as a term.
You should also tell the audience H3 has a lot of Destiny viewers pretending to be fans. Yeah. And basically, Reddit is a cesspit for streaming-related information because every person who is, let's just say this, has no life. And I don't mean that as in a butthurt way of I just don't like what they're saying. I just mean literally they sit online all fucking day, but not in a productive way, like leveling in World of Warcraft or watching YouTube or participating in a community they like. Just kind of weird fucking various fixations and obsessions and identity formation about some other guy's opinion. Very weird shit. Very poorly adjusted behavior. maidenless if this was 18 months ago, we were talking about Elden Ring. Hakim is an Iraqi physician. I mean, I think if you go back and listen to what Hakim said, optically, unless I'm, I didn't listen to the pod myself, but the clips that I saw about Hakim, he didn't seem to be celebrating Hamas. It was JT that was doing kind of optically bad shit. Just being very glib about the IDF soldiers dying and things like that. Which, from an international law perspective, if all Hamas did was attack the IDF, then that's not that would probably be legal. If they didn't hide themselves among civilians to do it. But the kibbutzes and hostage taking and other things with civilian deaths, not legal. Ethan said JT encouraged violence toward babies. Yeah, that's when Ethan was spreading the lie about 40 beheaded babies. You know what I mean? Like the whole 40 beheaded babies thing, which was a very viral lie that popped off right in the aftermath of the attacks. Ethan was very, very attached to that beheaded babies lie.
To demonize a system that is different from their own, regardless of the facts. They're using it as a synonym for totalitarian, a word you don't really hear much anymore. It's sort of fallen by the wayside in favor of authoritarian. Kind of like using the word commie as a slur has been superseded by tanky in the last few years. Same idea, different era. Both of these words, authoritarian and totalitarian, have been leveled at fascism and communism, often in a direct attempt to conflate the two. This is largely due to the US's extreme anti-communism post-World War II, to the point that they'd lump in their former friends, the people without whom the Allies could not have won the war, with what most people believe to be the greatest evil in history. Yeah, that's all well and good. People use a political term vaguely to demonize their opponents. Big surprise. But we still need some specifics. What exactly makes a state authoritarian? Well, if you have a scroll through the comments of just about any political video that talks about socialism, you'll find people ready with their pre-written list of objections, usually bundled under the prime objection, that's authoritarian. Things on that list include the existence of large prisons or labor camps, a covert police force, state media, a strongman leader, censorship, that sort of thing. And to be fair, all those things do sound scary, and none of them are ideal. I think we can all agree that we'd love to live in a society where prisons didn't need to exist. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before we go any further, I want to emphasize that I'm not trying to attack anyone here. The objection to authoritarianism is present in a lot of different camps. People may define it a little differently. For example, a libertarian might call seatbelt laws authoritarian, while a liberal might consider the influence of the church on the government authoritarian. Meanwhile, my anarchist friends are yelling from the back of the room that the very existence of a state is authoritarian and we need to abolish bedtime. Again, teasing, no offense intended. Okay, we all on the same page? Authoritarianism is a red flag for a lot of people.
Okay, first of all, though, he's not even teasing because there was a huge Twitter discourse from the anarchists about bedtimes for children being authoritarian and oppressive and that children should be able to set their own bedtimes. And then there was another thread about how schools and literacy programs are authoritarian because you're forcing people to think a certain way so that they can comprehend a written language, which alters their individuality. Again, on anarchism.
And there are some specific objections we can consider. So, let's consider them. Here's what we're going to do for the rest of the video. First, we'll look at the list of objections as understood by liberals. And I mean that in the broadest sense. Liberals as in subjects of liberal states, not in the conservative versus liberal sense.
Has a link.
Then we'll look at those same objections as understood by the left. Again, pretty broadly speaking. Basically everyone from social democrats and beyond. Then finally, we'll consider a better way to understand authority and authoritarianism. Sound good? Alright, liberal friends, I've got a pretty good idea of the kinds of places you feel are authoritarian. Top of the list, Soviet Union, the big one. perhaps the target of the most intense smear campaign in history. Then we've got Cuba, China, North Korea, and likely a handful of other projects, but I think it's safe to say that these are the big ones. When you look at any of these projects, it's not difficult to see the one thing they all have in common. They're all socialist. And when you see this, it's not entirely unreasonable to come to the conclusion that authoritarianism is a core feature of socialism. We'll address this a bit more thoroughly in a few minutes, but suffice it to say that in the West, we may have a slightly biased opinion on the matter, through no fault of our own. We've just been subjected to nearly 100 years of Red Scare propaganda at this point. Everything we're taught growing up in the imperial core, especially in the US, points us towards the conclusion that communism is evil and capitalism is righteous. But here's the part where I'm going to have to ask you to be willing to consider some unpleasant truths. And I don't say
Communism, America's mortal enemy. By Fred Schwartz. Also, America includes Canada and Mexico, apparently. Honestly, I would just take that poster and say based. Based as fuck. Where could I get that poster?
Going to have to ask you to be willing to consider some unpleasant truths. And I don't say these things to engage in whataboutism or because I'm anti-American or something. Quite the contrary. I believe that in order for any country to live up to the standards it sets for others, it needs to soberly reflect on the facts. And the facts indicate that everything we're taught about these awful authoritarian socialist countries, we are also guilty of, and often to a far greater degree. Let me elaborate. One thing that rarely gets the attention it deserves is how we talk about authoritarianism. And I mean that literally, like the very words we use. Take the DPRK. We never hear about the government of North Korea. We hear about the Kim regime. This is common when Westerners talk about non-capitalist governments, or even capitalist ones that aren't vassal states of the US. They have a regime, we and our allies have a government.
One thing that I want to say is, like, I often wonder, when do you guys think America became a democracy? And I think never is the correct answer. But I think that the most generous answer you could possibly give would be the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, Loving v. Virginia, Brown versus Board of Education. I think that's the most generous answer you could possibly give. I honestly think that America wasn't a democracy before Loving, or not Loving, but Lawrence v. Texas or Obergefell. Like, it's very easy to say that America has not been a democracy for that long. Even if you were being extremely generous. So if the Soviet Union was so bad, what would you call the United States until 65 or 67? Interracial marriage was still illegal in half the country in 1967. Did you know that? Was that a freedom? Was that democracy? And if not, what does that say about authoritarianism? Because then you have to concede that liberalism could easily coexist with authoritarianism and did so in the United States. 20 years into the Cold War, the United States was an authoritarian fascist regime or ethno-state. But we would never look at it like that. Why not, though? Why wouldn't you look at it like that? Serious question. Why wouldn't you? From personal experience, IRL, anti-communists don't give a shit about black people. That's because everyone who's anti-communist is almost certainly a fascist. Anti-communism is just the PR accepted term for fascism. 11 years before I was born, indigenous people didn't have equal rights. I mean, both of my parents were well alive, and America was still segregated. Like, my dad was in high school, and America was still segregated in much of it. That's crazy. DSA Fish, Hassan, and Caroline in the title. Easy clap. Hey. Do you see my viewership right now? Do the Quantourage know what Lawrence v. Texas was about? Oh, sure. We should talk about that really quick. Since we're talking about liberal authoritarianism. There is a website I like to recommend if you're ever looking up Supreme Court cases. It's called Oye. It will give you you can literally listen to the oral arguments for whatever case.
We'll hear argument next in number 02102, John Geddes Lawrence and Tyrone Garner versus Texas.
We're listening to the argument. Okay, I didn't know there was going to be 45 seconds of dead air. I apologize.
Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the Court, the state of Texas in this case claims the right to criminally punish any unmarried adult couple for engaging in any form of consensual sexual intimacy that the state happens to disapprove of. It further claims that there's no constitutional problem raised by a criminal statute that is directed not just at conduct, but at a particular group of people. A law that criminalizes forms of sexual intimacy only for same-sex couples and not for anyone else in the state who has the right to make a free choice to engage in the identical conduct. Petitioners are two adults who were arrested in a private home and criminally convicted simply because they engaged in one of the forms of sexual intimacy that is on the banned list in the state of Texas for same-sex couples. They bring two constitutional claims to the court today. First, among the fundamental rights that are implicit in our concept of ordered liberty must be the right of all adult couples, whether same-sex or not, to be free from unwarranted state intrusion into their personal decisions about their preferred forms of sexual expression. Second, there's no legitimate and rational justification under the Equal Protection Clause for a law that regulates forms of sexual intimacy that are permitted in the state only for same-sex couples, thereby creating a kind of second-class citizenship for that group of people.
So basically, if you don't want to, if you've never heard of this case before, let me just zoom. Basically, in Texas, responding to a reported weapons disturbance at a private residence, Houston police entered John Lawrence's apartment and saw him with another adult man, Tyrone Garner, engaging in a private consensual sex act. Lawrence and Garner were arrested and convicted of deviant sexual intercourse in violation of a Texas statute forbidding two persons of the same sex to engage in certain intimate sexual conduct. In affirming, the State Court of Appeals held that the statute was not unconstitutional under the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, with Bowers v. Hardwick controlling. The question: do the criminal convictions of John Lawrence and Tyrone Garner under the Texas homosexual conduct law, which criminalizes sexual intimacy by same-sex couples, but not identical behavior by different sex couples, violate the 14th Amendment guarantee of equal protection of laws? Do their criminal convictions for adult consensual sexual intimacy in the home violate their vital interests in liberty and privacy protected by the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, and should Bowers v. Hardwick be overruled? And the answer of that was in a 6-3 decision, yeah, you can have gay sex. But 3 justices, including one who is still on the court, by the way, believed that you should be able to be convicted and put into prison for being gay. And we're not talking about having gay sex in public or anything. We're talking about in the privacy of your own bedroom. And this was in 2003. Texas was convicting people of being gay in 2003. Was America authoritarian when these cops kicked in the door of a gay couple and arrested them for having sex? Was America authoritarian when they did that? You tell me.
The way we talk about different systems goes a long way towards coloring our perception of them. People criticize labor camps or secret police or any number of other scary authoritarian words. But here's the thing, we have those too. And if you look at the data, often to a far greater extent than any socialist project in history. We just don't call them by those names. We don't have secret police, we have plainclothes officers or the intelligence community. We don't have gulags, we have detention centers, which, by the way, house far more inmates than the Soviet Union ever did. And of course, we don't have slave labor, we have penal labor. We put inmates to work manufacturing hand sanitizer during a pandemic or fighting fires because enshrined in the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, slavery is illegal except as punishment for a crime. And a lot of the time, that crime is just being poor. A parking ticket you couldn't pay, getting caught with the same drug a rich person uses, but you don't have the money to buy yourself out of trouble. We don't have a Ministry of War, we have a Department of Defense, despite never once fighting a defensive war. Every military action taken by the United States, from bombing hospitals to drone striking foreign citizens, is given the cover of defense. We don't have state media or propaganda, we just have news. Those news outlets are, of course, all owned by the same corporate interest who funnel millions of dollars a year into government pockets to make sure their profits are secure, and their anchors dutifully repeat the ruling class's ideological positions.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Their guys are dictators, ours are presidents. Their state has a regime, ours has a government. We are free and happy, they're oppressed and miserable. Our nuclear arsenal is for deterrence. Theirs is a threat to global peace, despite the US being the only country on Earth to have ever used nuclear weapons. And we did it twice, on civilians, on purpose. We have a democracy, they have a dictatorship, despite by all accounts places like Cuba and China having far more representation and opportunity for democratic involvement than places like the US. So the way we talk about government structures, characteristics, and actions matters. Without even knowing it, we can end up falling prey to some very subtle, very sophisticated propaganda that primes us to hate people we've never met, whose economic and government structures we know nothing about, and with whom we share far more in common than we do with our own leaders. Okay, fine, but those are just words. Who cares what we call our stuff? All right, let's talk specifics. In a striking 2012 article by Adam Gopnik called The Caging of America, the author notes that, quote, overall, there are now more people under correctional supervision in America, more than 6 million, than were in the Gulag under Stalin at its height. And this is coming from an American writer with a thoroughly liberal worldview. It's a poignant comparison because, as we all know, Stalin, gulags, and the Soviet Union are the trifecta of what the average person sees as authoritarianism. The fact that we're doing worse than that, even if you buy the inflated numbers of widely debunked books like the Black Book of Communism, should tell you something. And fun fact, the CIA wrote a report in the 50s that the whole Stalin strongman thing was largely a myth. It was just a very useful myth to the capitalist powers, so why not perpetuate it? But I know what you're thinking. Everybody knows the US has a thing for prisons. That's like one thing we could ease back on a little bit. That doesn't make the country authoritarian. Let's continue then. How about surveillance? It's pretty widely believed that citizens of socialist states are the subject of extreme surveillance. But what if I told you that none of them hold a candle to the US? Don't believe me? Take a look at Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Thanks to this piece of legislation, every single person in the United States is the subject of incredibly intense scrutiny. We have a mass surveillance program that allows for the collection of phone conversations, text messages, emails, web searches, and social media messages. Everything you do is being monitored. But wait, it's called the Foreign Surveillance Act, so why are we in the crosshairs? Well, it started out as a way to keep tabs on communications between US citizens and foreign nationals deemed a threat of some kind. But over the last decade or so, the scope of the project has expanded dramatically. What was once strictly a counterterrorism tool, which is already incredibly vague and dangerous, has now morphed into a domestic surveillance apparatus where the NSA provides this data to the CIA and the FBI, which they can use to open investigations into any person in the country without a warrant. But what if we want to give US intelligence agencies the benefit of the doubt? They're just doing their job, right? If you're not a criminal, you have nothing to hide. According to a 2022 report, the FBI and CIA conduct millions of these backdoor searches for no legitimate reason. They've pulled data on family members, journalists, political commentators, even government officials. For what reason? Who knows? They want dirt on a politician they don't like, so they read their Twitter DMs. They saw you in a coffee shop and thought you were cute and asked the barista for your name. That's all they need. Some random intelligence creep can plug in your name, phone number, or email address and have access to years of your personal communications, web activity, address, personal details, all of it. No authoritarian regime in history has ever wielded that kind of surveillance power. Okay, dystopian prison population, largest surveillance apparatus in history, that all sounds pretty bad. But at least we have the freedom to criticize the government, right? The secret police aren't going to come drag us away. Well, I've got some bad news for you there, too. US police are the most vicious and unaccountable in the world by far. There are plenty of videos online of police arresting journalists, brutalizing peaceful protesters, even laughing about killing innocent people. I have a whole video on the subject, actually. But here's the gist of it. According to ongoing reporting, US police kill over 1,000 American citizens per year. 1,000 people. And I can hear the objection already. Yeah, well, some of those people were probably criminals. Police are not meant to be judge, jury, and executioner. They're meant to arrest people if they have to, and then hand them over to the judge, jury, and we really should talk about the executioner part.
I think this is like one of the things that's really fascinating about people is it's like, if you were going to imagine a police state, wouldn't you include a population of people that are supportive of the police doing violence to the citizenry without redress, without question? A police state doesn't spring out of nowhere. You need a police state polity. And that involves at least a large portion of the population being supportive of police operating in such a manner. And I think if you're talking about authoritarianism, if you're talking about a police state, America qualifies. I mean, honestly, I don't think I can imagine a state that it wouldn't qualify more. I mean, police in this country are literally politically unaccountable. They oftentimes endorse political candidates. They will do work slowdowns and work stoppages. They will publicly criticize the policies of their elected officials. Can you imagine if the chief of the general of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the chairperson of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was criticizing the president's military orders and going, "Yeah, that guy's a fucking idiot," and openly insubordinate? That happens every day with police unions. They investigate and abuse and arrest and harass their local critics. They're frequently completely unaccountable and immune from prosecution and lawsuit through a concept known as qualified immunity. So they're immune to being punished by the law. They involve themselves in politics. They oppress their dissenters. and at least some portion of the population, a rather large portion of the population, supports such a culture. What do you think this is? They also have no legal obligation to help you. So a political entity that is unaccountable, with no obligations, with nothing but rights, and the ability to use violence at a whim, that's the American policing regime. If that isn't a police state, I don't know what is. Especially when you pair it with the facts that more people are in prison in the United States, both as an absolute number and relative to our portion of our population, than any other country in the world. If that's not a police state, what is? Have you heard about the fascists in Marion, Kansas, who killed a 99-year-old newspaper owner because they wrote a piece on the chief of police being drunk on the job? Yeah. Will Israel take this opportunity to invade other Middle Eastern countries and expand its territory? Well, I feel like to answer that question, Israel would almost certainly need to have sufficient provocation, at least in the eyes of American politicians. Which, when I think about American politicians, the answer starts to become yes in my mind. But I don't want to catastrophize, of course.
Open social media on any day of the week, and you'll see a story of an officer-involved shooting, where the media tries really hard to twist the reporting to make the cop sound less like a murderer. With body cameras often required these days, it's getting harder for them to hide their crimes, though they still try. Anyway, the bottom line is this.
Well, the other thing is, like, can I talk about body cameras for a second? Can we honestly talk about body cameras for a second? Body cameras are oftentimes POV perspective cameras. In other words, they implicitly put you, the audience, into the point of view of the cop. It's not an objective examination of the facts. It's like a first-person shooter. And we are socialized to consider the person in the first-person perspective to be the good guy, to be the protagonist. It's part of our media. It's part of our video games. It's part of our culture, that, you know, that point of view perspective. So just from that alone, it puts you in that kind of position where you are the cop. What would you do if you were this cop? As opposed to an objective, outside, disembodied, third-person view where you see a police officer abusing a citizen. It instead, intellectually and intuitively appears like you're the person doing the abuse. And instantly, if it seems like you are operating, if you know, for many people, there's a psychological attachment to defending what you did, even though you didn't do it. Body cameras are better than nothing, but I certainly don't consider them to be objective, especially when you consider that police often turn them off and turn them on when it is advantageous for themselves. What would the alternative be? Would it be accepted to replace them with, say, a CCT system in the UK that nobody wants? No. The alternative would be disarming police. The alternative would be force them to keep the body cameras on 24/7 so we get all the full context of everything that happens, as opposed to 30 seconds, you know, slices whenever they feel like it. The alternative would be complete transparency of every police body camera.
If we look at any other country on Earth, let's say China, the hot-button supposed authoritarian hellhole of the day, and we compare police violence stats, the US is far worse. In the US, in 2022, police killed 1,201 people. In China, that number is 0. Oh, wait, nope, I read that wrong. 0 people killed by police since 2019, a year when 2 people were killed. 2 people in 5 years, in a country with a population 4 times greater than the United States. Since 2019, US police have killed nearly 5,000 American citizens. So, we have a more dystopian prison.
Yeah, they don't really kill people in China. They have these little, what are they fucking called? Man catchers? Chinese man wielding a huge knife is disarmed by a group using Sasomata poles. Yeah, see this thing? They're like these, you see this? They're like these long poles that you work with other people and you could just push them back and knock them down and they can't really hit you or attack you. Here's one in China. Here's an example. So instead of shooting you to death, they knock you down with this little goofy pole. Isn't that a very old weapon? Yes. Why would you do something different? You don't need to kill the person. You just knock them down with the pole, and it's funny, and you hold them down. Oh my God, they're voting on the speaker. Jordan is losing more votes. Already failed. Okay,
Steele.
This is
Jordan. Stefanik. Jordan. Style. Jordan. Stubbe. Jordan. Stevens. Jeffries. Strickland. Jeffries. Strong. Jordan.
Sorry for stopping the authoritarian video in the middle.
Jeffries.
I just wanted to show you this.
Sykes.
Pepelov fail. All right, let's finish the video.
And for this set, we actually had 2
situation, we're the most spied on people on Earth, and our police murder 3 people on average every single day. If that's not authoritarian, I don't know what is. And this isn't to run defense for the excesses of past and present socialist projects. In fact, socialists are among the loudest and most well-read critics of these experiments. The Deprogram guys and I have a podcast episode specifically dedicated to the topic, and we plan to do more in the future. The point of all this is that if we're going to rightly level criticism at some states, we need to make sure to apply that standard universally. And that means starting at home rather than simply passing judgment on countries halfway around the world or that have long since passed. Okay, that's the liberal part taken care of. Now it's time to have a little chat with my friends on the Western left. The right does a very good job at presenting a unified front. The capitalist class and the forces of reaction are incredibly powerful in the imperial core. The left is already on the back foot, and we have been for many, many years. This is why it's frankly absurd how much infighting goes on among the left. Social Democrats sniping at tankies for being authoritarian doesn't do the movement any good. Funnily enough, the label authoritarian is only ever applied to successful socialist projects. The ones that failed were somehow more pure. But the moment a new system takes steps to ensure the security of their people and their new project, they're labeled authoritarian. I think part of this is that there's a lack of understanding among Western self-professed leftists regarding what it actually takes to change the status quo across an entire country. Every revolution, including bourgeois revolutions like the American one, are authoritarian by default. Those in power will never give up their power without a struggle. They're not going to let you vote out the very system that benefits them. To understand the nature of revolution a little better, let's go back to the man himself. No, the other one. His sugar daddy. There we go. Friedrich Engels. This large beard wrote a brilliant little piece called On Authority. It's like a page long. None of you have any excuse not to read it. It's linked below. But here's the part that I think is most applicable to this video. Have these gentlemen ever seen a revolution? A revolution is certainly the most authoritarian thing there is. It is the act whereby one part of the population imposes its will upon the other part by means of rifles, bayonets, and cannons.
Oh shit! It's working! Okay, chat, I got new AirPods so that I could not have to wear my headset all the time. All right, hold on. Okay, let me just fix the let me just fix this device. All right, tell me, can you hear these? Wait, it disconnected. Why did it disconnect? All right.
And if the victorious party does not want to have fought in vain, it must maintain this rule by means of the terror which its arms inspire in the reactionists. Would the Paris Commune have lasted a single day if it had not made use of this authority of the armed people against the bourgeois? Should we not, on the contrary, reproach it for not having used it freely enough? Therefore, either one of two things. Either the anti-authoritarians don't know what they're talking about, in which case they are creating nothing but confusion, or they do know, and in that case they are betraying the movement of the proletariat. In either case, they serve the reaction. While it might not feel good to be called out from beyond the grave, it's so important that we understand what Engels was talking about here, because it's still true today. If a mass of people decide they're done with the current oppressive system, rise up, build something new, and
True, I should just immediately turn off the main breaker in my house. Yeah, that's definitely what we need. Definitely. Look at this. Look at my hair. Like, look at this shit. I've gotten one trim since 2020. It's actually getting ridiculous at this point. I might actually have to get a haircut. Rob Zombie looking at. So true, bestie. So true.
Then fail to protect the gains they've made, their project will be destroyed. We've seen it many times throughout history. The reactionary elements in society won't go away, and people with wealth and power before the revolution will still have that wealth, and will have likely fled somewhere like the US where they can agitate for military or CIA intervention. This was the case in Chile in 1973, when the democratically elected socialist president Salvador Allende failed to take preventative measures to ensure the vicious reactionary class and their US-based co-conspirators couldn't undermine them. Long story short, the Chilean right wing launched a US-backed and US-funded coup to overthrow the government, eliminate Allende, and install a fascist military dictatorship that plunged the country into recession and suffering for decades. In order to avoid this happening, a budding socialist project, or heck, any project, requires police, it requires the shutting down of reactionary outlets, the banning of certain kinds of speech. There's a reason Germany banned everything related to the Nazis, for example. It's because they wanted to keep that sentiment from spreading as much as possible. It requires an...
I mean, like, I have to say that I think there's absolutely should be mandatory that fascism is illegal as an idea being spread. It has no redeeming characteristics. We know what it results in. The only use of fascism is violence. Internally directed violence. There is no like, you gotta hand it to the fascists. No. We should thoroughly repress it. Was World War II, was the Holocaust not enough evidence? Was Unit, what was that? Unit 731, I think it is, in Japan. Was Imperial Japan's repression of Manchukuo and Korea and Taiwan and China not enough? Was the disappearances in Latin America? Was it the death squads in Central America? His appearances in Spain and Portugal. Is that not enough? Is there civil rights for the fascists? Like, what do you think? What insight do you think fascists are going to provide? If you are a person who believes foolishly that fascism promotion is a good idea because of the marketplace of ideas, what is the advantage? And here's the thing. The marketplace of ideas is a fascinating metaphor because we don't allow people to sell whatever the fuck they want in the market. You can't buy asbestos insulation anymore. You can't buy a nuclear bomb. We recognize that there are some items that shouldn't be widely available, that the sale of them would represent a threat to the community. So why do we fail to recognize that about fascism when we're talking about the so-called marketplace of ideas? Think of fascism as a nuclear bomb for sale. Libertarians would say, yeah, sell it. Let the people sell it. Let them sell it. But all it takes is one nuclear bomb going off to destroy millions of lives. So we say the impingement on your liberty of not allowing you to buy a nuke is worth not having to deal with millions of possible deaths. So if you think that the marketplace is it's reasonable to regulate what people can buy and sell and the purity of a product and the quality of a product, then why wouldn't we want to regulate speech to some degree for the most extreme, harmful, and provably useless ideologies? For example, fascism. Now, I could hear some of you objecting and being like, Mike, they'll do the same thing to leftism. It's almost like liberals are willing to use a force to enforce their ideology. It's almost as if liberalism is just as authoritarian as any socialist project. What country do you think is more authoritarian? Chile under Pinochet, or Guatemala under Arbenz? The guy just wanted a minimum wage for the agricultural workers. He didn't want to have United Fruit Company owning tens and tens of thousands of acres of land that they left fallow. That's why communism is already illegal in America. Technically, it's not illegal. You just have to register with the government. And if you don't, then you can go to prison. Notice we don't have a fascist registration act. Yeah. Being able to freely elect masters does not eliminate either masters or slaves. Arbenz redistributed his own land as he was fairly rich. Yeah, he was pretty cool. All right, be right back.
An intelligence apparatus to listen for terrorist plots, which were all too common post-revolution. In East Germany, the reactionaries would routinely attempt to blow up civilian train lines. It requires prisons to keep these people off the streets. And historically speaking, the socialists have been much better at using prisons for rehabilitation rather than just packing human beings away to rot like we do in the US. These things may not be morally correct, but like it or not, they are necessary. And that's something that every system has agreed on. I would love nothing more than to see an alternative work, but it never has. Maybe one day I'll be proven wrong. That would be amazing. But to the people who believe it is possible, you need to ask yourself how it's going to happen. We've seen what the people in Tsarist Russia had to do. We've seen what the Cubans had to do. We've seen what the Vietnamese had to do, what the Chinese had to do, what the Americans had to do to separate from the British. Your anti-authoritarianism, while I genuinely believe it comes from a good place, is handing an easy victory to the capitalist regime.
Damn! Damn! All right, well, I mean, JT. Listen. We don't advocate for any activity that's illegal here. Why? Because that's against the terms of service. But I think what he's talking about here is not really advocating for anybody to break any laws. He is just saying that from a historical analysis perspective, when you overturn a previous regime, there is oftentimes a reaction that attempts to defend it. And that's true. I mean, that's been true forever. Look at feudalism. How many civil wars took place in the UK to overturn various feudal arrangements and turn toward liberalism? I mean, they had the English Civil War. They had a barons, like the Magna Carta was basically a bunch of noblemen kidnapping the king, putting a sword to his throat and saying, we want you to sign this document guaranteeing rights. That was violent. The English Civil War, that was violent. So liberalism was established through extraordinary, I mean, we all know about the French Revolution. We all know about the American Revolution. We all know about various revolutions that took place in 1848 throughout Europe, many of whom failed. We know that Napoleon's conquests cleared away a lot of ancient feudal arrangements that allowed liberalism to sprout out of the ashes. You know, so like capitalism, like democracy was not established in Austria or Germany through peaceful means. They had to lose multiple world wars. So if you're talking about, you know, if liberalism took violence to establish, the idea, just claiming that violence can never be used in order to overturn a previous oppressive regime is ahistorical. Americans seem to not learn that a very large portion of the American population, especially the South, fought with the British and remained loyalists after the war. There was a large population of people that left America after the United States won. How do you combat fascism in Hoi 4 or Vicky? I mean, personally, I think that in both Vicky and Hoi 4, communists are the best at beating fascists in the game. Liberal democracies are incredibly weak in Hoi 4. You haven't updated your sub count in 24 hours? Oh shit, you're right. Sorry about that, chat. My sub count is actually not 80,025. It's 8,320. That's the sub count, folks.
They want you to play by their rules.
80,000 easy, I wish.
You play by their rules, you lose. End of story.
Bleep Boops, thank you for the 10 tier 1s.
One final thing that's important to note is that this anti-authoritarian
for the 33 months.
Stance is very much a Western thing. And I think the reason for that is that we here in the Imperial Core are in a very privileged position. We can hold these naive beliefs because we don't have any skin in the game. We're not the ones under the boot. We're not the ones whose resources are being extracted, or whose homes are being bombed, or whose cities are being occupied by armed invaders in the name of freedom and democracy. We have the luxury of condemning others because we've never been on the receiving end. Think for just a moment what it would be like if your neighborhood was occupied by a foreign military force, doing unspeakable things to your friends and loved ones, taking your belongings, burning homes, torturing people in the name of national security. What means would you resort to in that situation? I can't answer that for you, but it's something to think about. I know this has been kind of a heavy video, and for a lot of you, I'm sure this is the first time you've been asked to look at your home country more critically. If you're interested in learning more about any of the stuff we've talked about,
we are dangerously close to a hype train. And while we're only 2 hours into the stream, yeah, we're 2 hours in, chat, I swear. When somebody gives 10 subs, I don't know, it seems like a good time to get a hype train. If you enjoy this type of content, please consider supporting it. Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 subs. If you have Amazon Prime, you can attach it to your Twitch. You got one free sub a month. And it's called your Twitch Prime sub. And you could also give bits or direct donations. Wow. Money, money, money. Exactly.
Links in the description. We all have a responsibility to choose our words carefully, apply labels correctly,
thank you
and hold our own nation's...
Tier 3 for 29 months. Kicking off the hype train. Gato con Arma. Amor. Thank you as well. How does JT condom hummus? Yeah. Footage of the new displacement camp in South Gaza has come out. This is on UN land. What the fuck? Oh no. I don't even want to, hold on. I don't even want to show, hold on. Let me just pull this over here. Don't condom hummus, chat. Are you all condoming hummus? You better condom hummus. This is really sad. All right, let's finish this video. It's almost over.
To the same standard we expect others to meet. Maybe it's time we retire the word authoritarian and try to engage with the facts more precisely, more honestly, and in good faith.
Thank you, everybody.
This is a really interesting topic when you dig into it, and as you might expect, vaguely using words like authoritarian isn't just a problem in one corner of the political arena. So I just wanted to take a second to show you how prevalent that vague language is even among mainstream news outlets, with today's sponsor, Ground News. Here we have 3 examples of news coverage of China, the US's current favorite boogeyman. We've got one source from the right, one from the corporate center, and one from what most Americans would consider the left. Notice how each article uses our conveniently vague word to make the reader feel a certain way. For the right, China is authoritarian because it's not conforming to the American conception of unfettered free markets. For the center, Latin American countries are authoritarian for choosing to trade with China rather than Taiwan, which would benefit US corporations. And for the so-called left, if you open the article, China is guilty of digital authoritarianism for pushing back on false narratives produced by Western antagonists. As we've seen throughout the video, this behavior is par for the course, even among professional news outlets. As with anything, the key here is to remember who benefits from this kind of slander, and Ground News goes a long way towards helping the reader understand what interests are funding each of these outlets. This is something I get asked about a lot. How do I help parents or friends break out of their little propaganda bubble? It's great to analyze rhetoric like this, examining wording to look for bias, and determining who's behind each outlet, but it's a lot of work, and none of us have time for that.
Did you see that all of JT's channels plus Deprogram are off Nebula because they wouldn't condom hummus? Wow.
That's why I always recommend people check out Ground News, because it has a ton of really useful tools to make building...
All you have to say, this is my personal opinion. And I don't think I am any less of a lefty but for saying it, which is Hamas is a right-wing fascist party that exists because it was a cat's paw for the US and Israel as a way to prevent Palestinians from asserting their own sovereignty. It's not revolutionary. And if you're one of those people that's like, how dare you question and oppress people struggling for liberation? Because they are being funneled into an easy to demonize enemy. So I condemn Hamas for one reason, the most important reason. They are counterproductive to the liberation of Palestinians. Not just because of the use of violence, but because what their ideology is. I see a lot of people stumbling over this, where it's like, oh, how can you condemn right-wing people? I'm an internationalist. I don't care where your right-wing group is from. I think it sucks. And sometimes, yes, if a one right-wing group is fighting another right-wing group, you make a lesser of two evils calculation for what outcome you want. But let's not be confused. Hamas is not trying to achieve Palestinian liberation in a sense that you and I would ever comprehend as positive. Like getting the occupation to end and then turning Palestine into yet another American puppet state with an authoritarian regime. And I mean authoritarian in the sense that they deny people any participation in their political future. An example of that is Saudi Arabia, Qatar. That's the type of government America wants in the Middle East because they want to control the valuable resources that are there. That's all. This was the actual statement from JT. How come First Thought releases this week aren't showing up on Nebula? First Thought, Second Thought, and the D program are no longer partnered with Nebula. It wasn't a good fit anymore. We mutually decided it was time to part ways. Some Nebula creators wanted me to make a clarifying statement on my position regarding Israel and Palestine. It was just getting too close to a both sides thing for me, which felt like compromising my principles. Just a difference of priorities, business optics versus taking a principled stance. Yeah.